ask a final contemplative question before we close our eyes. Is it possible to know that there's a city, the rest of the city that we live in, the rest of the landscape on the other side of that wall, without referring to a thought, an image, or memory, to know it? Is it possible to know that the rest of the city, or the continuance of the landscape, is just on the other side of that wall, without referring to a thought, an image, or memory? What are the implications of that, if so? If it's not truly possible to know, what are the implications of this? How far can we take this? If it isn't truly possible to know that the rest of the city or the landscape continues on just on the other side of that wall, then what does that mean for us? What does that mean the world is actually more like? What does that mean reality is more like? We, of course, conceptualize it as an earth, which is a globe, a sphere, and the landscape continues on all the way around the sphere. This is the way it's conceptualized, and rightfully so, because from the perspective or point of view of far, far away looking back at the earth, that's what it looks like. But what if that's only true from that vantage point? This gets interesting. The best analogy I can think of for this is one person in a home describing what the home looks like, and another person outside of the home describing what that same home looks like. For each person, what they're describing is true, but not for the other person. Not for the other person's point of view. Perhaps this is true with each moment in life as well. Yes, from the vantage point of space, looking back at the earth, it indeed looks like and is described as a sphere. But perhaps from our point of view on the earth, what it looks like, if we don't add what thought images, the concept that if we don't refer to the concept of what it looks like from the point of view from space, if we don't add that concept to our direct experience on the ground, meaning if we don't refer to thoughts, images, or memory, and we only refer to direct experience, perhaps the city or landscape that continues on just on the other side of that wall is only there if we refer to it. The experience of the city or continuing landscape just on the other side of that wall is only there if we refer to the thoughts, images, or memory that says so. What if the person inside of a home referred to the description of what the outside of the home looks like in order to know the inside of the home? How confusing would that be for the person to live their life inside of the home if they referred to the description that the person on the outside of the home gave to them? And perhaps this is true with each moment in our life. If we refer to the concept of the concept that a person from the vantage point of space gave to us about what the experience on the ground on Earth is like, then perhaps we would be confused. Or another word for confusion is perhaps it would unintentionally perpetuate suffering. Another word for confusion could be suffering. Because again, if a person who lived inside of a home referred to the description that someone on the outside of a home gave to them about the home, then inherently they would be misinformed about the inside of their home. Misinformed. So again, whilst looking at the item we've picked to gaze at, is it possible to know that this item is located? If we don't refer to thoughts, images, or memory, is it possible to know it's located? Or, to do this slightly differently, while we look at the item, just ask ourselves, is it located? And watch how the experience of it being located rises in the form of a thought describing the name of the city and how it relates to other cities or the web of connections across the globe. Perhaps we see that in image form. Just watch how that experience arises. We're really wanting to just watch how these experiences come together to create the experience we call life. The challenge is oftentimes suffering is inherent in this. Suffering is inherent in the combining of what is really here and the misdirected descriptions that thought tries to transpose on top of what is here. Misinformed. Thought's just automatically populating with what it knows. Truly, thought's not intending for it to be right. How could thought ever be right about something? truly the direct experience of something is its own truth, is the truth of itself. How could the indirect knowledge of a thought ever be true about any one thing? Which is why we're picking this point to continue to gaze at. Because whatever that thing you've picked to gaze at is its own truth. It is itself, needing no meaning, label, or description. It is its own truth. The experience of itself is itself. As soon as we attempt to put a label or description on the thing we're gazing at, we are immediately referring to indirect knowledge, not the thing itself. Like the old analogy of someone pointing at the moon, and they become fixated on your hand pointing, rather than looking at the moon. Thought is kind of like this. Rather than becoming fixated on thought's labels or descriptions, what is thought pointing at? Go to that. Go to the thing itself. It's its own truth. It needs no description. Especially a description that, in many instances, is going to be misinformed. Such as the way thought will refer to a point of view that comes from space, in order to know what reality is like on the ground, which again is similar to someone inside of a home referring to the description of what the outside of a home is like to know what the inside of a home is like. Of course, they would be confused. They would be misinformed. So, we're not asking anyone here to believe anything at all, but rather to check it for yourself. What are the facts of my experience? As I'm sitting here and I ask a contemplative question, does the experience of what arises exist prior to it arising, prior to thought describing it? And that's all we're wanting to witness, is if the experience of whatever thought describes is here, is indeed actually here, prior to that thought arising. So, that's why we have ourselves pick a point on the wall to sink into what is here, so we can witness the difference, the experiential difference, witness it for ourselves, the experiential difference of when a particular thought has arisen and what it was like prior to it arising. So we'll ask ourselves a contemplative question. Is it possible to know a location? What is the location I am currently in? And just watch a thought describe that, or an image of the city arise. Just continue to notice that. And you can kind of Allow His presence to be there. While we slowly sink into more of an experience of being. And now, if you like, we can close our eyes if you haven't already. What is the experience of being? The experience of being exists in all things, even when our eyes are open. But it's most clearly understood when our eyes are closed. The experience of being you could say, in analogy form, is what a dream is made up of. Whilst in the dream, though, it really feels like you are located in a city. And it is a three-dimensional physical world made up of matter. But it's only after awakening from the dream do we look back in hindsight and see, oh, there was no space, no distance. That dream city did not exist in a world, in a universe, although it felt like it did. But in fact, from the perspective of waking up, looking back at the dream, we can see that dream was made up of only being, only consciousness. And perhaps waking life is that too. Dreams are there just to show us, just to be a reflection of what, to better understand life, what life is really like. Perhaps everything only appears real, so to speak, when we are the closest to it. But just as we can wake up or become lucid in a dream and realize, oh, there's not a city on the other side of this dream room. The dream room ends right there. There's not a physical world that extends on beyond this dream room in this dream scene as I'm embodying this dream character. But it does feel like that. And we know that when we become lucid in a dream, when we wake up. And perhaps that's what we're attempting to do, is begin to wake up or become more lucid as far as the parts that come together and create the experience that we call life. Perhaps being is the only thing that truly exists. Everything else only seems to come into apparent existence as a result of referring to the thoughts and images and memories as they arise. Perhaps being, or as we sometimes refer to it as direct experience, but being is perhaps the ultimate truth, if we can call it truth, the ultimate direct experience. The word for being is God or divine, if you like that word. If you don't, we can say being or consciousness. But perhaps being is the only thing that is ever truly here. Everything else, a city or landscape continuing on just on the other side of that wall, only seems to come into an apparent existence as a result of referring to the thoughts, images, or memories as they arise. Those thoughts, images, and memory are essentially the misinformation gathered from a perspective from space that only makes sense from space. And we attempt to integrate that in with our direct experience of being on the ground. And that misinformation, it's not misinformation from the perspective of space, but from the perspective of the ground, you could say it's misinformation. Just as the description of the outside of a home is not misinformation for the person on the outside of the home, but indeed it would be for the person on the inside of the home. What is the practical application of reflecting on this, if it's not already obvious, which it may be? But of course, the practical application is seeing the way in which we are the ones who have the power to create that experience. That we not only create, but you could say modulate. You could say regulate. You could say when we see the relative truth of any thought, image, or memory, then we are no longer locked in to a previously demanding life or situation. If we see the relative truth of every thought, image, or memory, then we are no longer subject to the experience that those thoughts, images, or memory previously had created for us. We are no longer required to endure. We no longer have to long suffer. Long suffering would no longer be relevant if we can truly see the relativity of every thought, image, and memory. And that truly the only thing that is here is being. Or to word that in question form, what is left? What is left? And go ahead and ask yourself the final contemplative question. What do I most need to know? Ask yourself what would be most helpful for me to know moving forward. And give yourself a moment to either receive the answer or to formulate the answer. What would be most helpful for me to know moving forward? will very slowly begin to bring our being, pure consciousness, back to the objects of experience, which are truly not other than it, than being. However, to our conscious mind, it does appear that there's a distinction. So that's why we use those words. But we'll bring our being back to the body, back to feeling, back to thought, back to the world through what we see and hear in a moment when we open our eyes. When you feel you've sufficiently brought yourself back to these things, and as such feel centered, at that point only, feel free to take in a deep breath and open your eyes.